Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed that wonderful play. We are live with you this evening from Tamasha. I'm the outgoing Artistic Director in Kennedy. And it's a real pleasure to take the opportunity this evening, shortly before we meet the wonderful people behind the play that we've just heard, to introduce you to the new incoming Artistic Director.
Forgive me, I'm getting messages that I might be too quiet, so I'm going to take my headphones off, which I was listening to the playthrough. So I hope that is better. Good. I would like to invite Pooja to switch her camera on. This is the age we're in, and microphone, and to really welcome her. So I'm handing over to Pooja after 8 years. Pooja, though, is very much, it feels like, keeping it in the family, has a long history with the company, which I'm sure she'll tell you about in a moment. Outside of that, she's an award-winning director, actor, and mentor who's recognised as a fierce advocate for giving voice to marginalised groups. She's at the forefront of leadership change and active in organisations whose ethos helps achieve this. Co-chair of Artistic Directors of the Future and Stage Directors UK, trustee of Pop-Up Org, Community Interest Company, and Associate Director of Theatre Royal Stratford East, as well as an Associate Artist at Carly. For Tamasha, you may even have seen some of her work. She directed Ishi Din's Approaching Empty, which did a national tour in 2019, a co-production with Kiln Theatre and Live Theatre Newcastle. Her non-Tamasha credits also include Tanika Gupta's wonderful Lions and Tigers at the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, part of the Globe Theatre, for which she won Best Director at the Eastern Eye Arts, Culture and Theatre Awards. So the company is in very safe hands, I'm sure you'll agree. Pooja, welcome.
Thank you so much, Finn, and thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to hear that wonderful story. As for Tamasha, it has had a distinguished legacy of breaking new ground by championing voices that have historically been erased and silenced. So it's a great honour to take up this mantle and to build on the legacy of its predecessors, to celebrate the lived experiences and shared histories of the communities and the artists that make up our global majority. Despite the challenges that we've all faced over the last couple of years, I see opportunities burgeoning in equal measure. There is a growing awareness of the deep-seated inequalities in the sector and society at large. I mean, this has been highlighted most recently by Azim Rafiq's testimony against the Yorkshire Cricket Club. Now is the time for stories from our global majority to take up space. Now is the time for us to celebrate the stories of our colonial histories from perspectives and lived experiences of our colonial migrants. We can see the power of this commitment in the brilliant production that we've heard tonight, brought to us by the National Archives and Tamasha, penned by the brilliant Mel Pennant, and delivered with poignancy and beauty by the wonderful cast, creative and production teams. At Tamasha, we will discover new voices, build collaborations and tell courageous stories, which explore perspectives and bring our communities together. And I'm really excited about what the future holds for us all. Thank you, and thank you, Finn.
Thank you, Pooja. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to introduce you to such a well-attended public event, which I must comment on. I'm so pleased that we can do these things in this day and age and that they're this popular. Long may it continue. So Pooja, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Q&A. I'm going to welcome the panel now. But yes, watch out for everything that Pooja and Tamasha get up to in future. I'm sure it will be wonderful and grow and develop everything that we've, including this wonderful relationship with the National Archives, which is kind of, as a writer, I always said your spidey sense goes off when you walk into the archives. It's just this endless source of inspiration and stories. So I hope that we can do many more of these. But thank you, and until next time. Panel, I'm going to ask to switch their cameras and mics on, please. We're joined by four wonderful and knowledgeable people who I'll introduce to you in turn. Iqbal Singh is part of the outreach team at the National Archives, which he joined in 2015. He's led on a number of projects, including on the 1919 race riots, South Asia and the First World War, colonial seafarers in the 1920s, and the partition of British India. Iqbal led on developing the collaboration with Tamasha to explore the role of drama in engaging new and diverse audiences. He's currently part of the History PhD programme at King's College London, researching racism and empire in the interwar years. Welcome, Iqbal. Joining Iqbal is his colleague Kathryn Collins, who I'm really pleased can join us actually for reasons will become clear. She's an education officer at the Archives and has worked with Iqbal over a number of years on various projects, turning what he's been researching and developing as public engagement projects, such as this evening's audio drama, into excellent learning resources. So earlier this year, Kat and Iqbal presented to the Historical Association and the School's History Project, a resource Kat had designed, focused on colonial Indian seafarers, targeting Key Stage 3 and 4. Kat will now be developing an education resource based on this new research into Claudius and May's story and Mel's play, continuing her work highlighting the importance of the real-world applications that can flow from historical research. Welcome, Kat. Really glad you can join us. A wonderful writer with whom it all started, of course, Mel Pennant. Welcome, it's a pleasure to see you again. Mel was a graduate of the Tamasha Playwrights Programme back in the day, and it's been a pleasure to see your career flourish since then. Mel is a playwright, screenwriter and novelist. She graduated in 2014 with an MA in screenwriting at London College of Communication. Was a Tamasha Playwrights alumnus and previously wrote a short play called Smile in collaboration with the National Archives. In 2017, Mel was shortlisted for the Alfred Fagan Award for her play A Black Fella Walks Into a Bar. In 2018-19, she was awarded a place on the Hachette Tamasha pilot scheme for aspiring playwright novelists. Mel's play Seeds, directed by Anastasia Osei-Kuffour, who's directed this evening's piece, and produced by Teatr Fhodzi, had just commenced a national tour when lockdown halted production. A familiar story, sadly, but it's been a pleasure to reunite you both. And last but not least, of course, Anastasia, the director of that beautiful piece. Anastasia is the director, writer, producer, and poet. She trained as a director through the Young Vic Directors Programme and on the National Theatre Directors Course. She's currently Stephen Williams' assistant on the Searchlight feature film Chevalier and artistic director of Rested Vale Production Company. Her direction includes Precious Little Thing for BBC Radio 4, Typical, the film, Soho Theatre on Demand, Seeds for Leeds Playhouse, Live, Newcastle, Derby and Warwick Arts Centre, and Cutting It, the Royal Court UK Schools Tour, as well as Fingerprints on the Moon at the Finborough. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to start with, so the way this works, I've done it before, is you can ask a question in the question function. It's better than the chat, and then I'll keep an eye on that so the panelists don't have to. I'm going to kick off with one question to each, and then I'll start weaving in questions from the floor. Iqbal, I'll start with you if I may, as this is just the latest in a long line of these kinds of things that we've done with you, and they're getting better and better and higher and higher profile, it seems, and we're thrilled to have gone on that journey with you. But what you're so brilliant at is contextualizing everything. So could you give us a bit of context about the story we've just heard and what the records actually tell us about this time and this kind of story?
Yeah, no, thank you, Finn. I mean, this story is the follow-on from the work that we did on the First World War. And I think the First World War was such a momentous, moment, as it were, and it changed everything, and particularly for those people of colour that we refer to today, I mean, as the term, but at that time they were referred to as coloured people of the British Empire. The world had changed, and that's the context for this work that we're looking at here. And I think Claudius's story, and Mel has done great justice to it, is to draw out some of those issues, that sense of alienation, that sense that you were an imperial citizen was now no longer a given. And this idea of race-based exclusion was starting to really come in, not just in Britain, but elsewhere in the world. And so that's really the context in which we're kind of now operating in this interwar period. And that's what I think, for us was very important to sort of move the story on. So what happens after the First World War ends? And so that, in a nutshell, is why we're now really focusing on the interwar period. And our big exhibition, which was mooted at the beginning, is about the 1920s. And the release of the 1921 census is happening in January as well. So really, this is very, very important. But also, I think the 20s gives us a lot to learn from. So there's lots of reasons why these types of plays at the moment are so important.
Thank you. I've observed before on these panels that you're working your way through the 20th century, and we're enjoying going on the journey with you and seeing what you dig up. So keep them coming. Mel, I mean, it's these events are so strange. Like we were talking earlier about it being a bit like the nearest we get to a press night these days, which is sad because actually I want to take a moment to give a round of applause actually for what we heard, because it was the most extraordinary piece of work, and we were all so thrilled with it. And from the first draft onwards, it was just it just came together seamlessly. And Anastasia, likewise, the extraordinary performances you drew out. So yes, on that, just a moment of celebration, really, before I ask you a question. I suppose the question most people want to know is, what's it kind of like getting a commission like this as a writer? It's not just an idea you've dreamt up, is it? It sort of comes from real people and real records. And what's that process like of turning that into living, breathing drama?
So it's magical for me, actually. So I was involved in a previous project, the Loyalty and Dissent project with the National Archives in 2017. And so I knew just how amazing working with the National Archives and Tamasha Theatre can be in this space. And yeah, it's, you know, all I can say is it's almost sort of breathtaking, I think, just to imagine that you're dealing with real people, real archive material, and then bringing your imagination to it and trying to bring it alive and do it justice. The process involves Iqbal and his team, other fantastic members at the National Archives, getting together relevant resources. This time around, I wasn't able to go into the National Archives physically because of lockdown, but they provided some of the wonderful letters that I'm sure you'll hear about and that Iqbal will reference. And then they act like tent poles almost. They're sort of like moments or fragments of the story that you then have to interpret. For me, I always like to start with why, and there's a lot of whys in this story. Why did May not give her consent? Why do we have this letter from the Wirral Union right at the end, sort of saying, why has this man gone to Jamaica, and you know he's earning all this money, and his wife, you know, and children are in the poorhouse, and it's just trying to find answers to those whys. Really, that is wonderful in terms of exploring the same.
Thank you. Maybe we'll unpack a bit later about where kind of fact and fiction are sort of meet or part in these things, because that's always interesting. Anastasia, that was a beautiful job. Thank you so much. I was just a joy to listen to, and the layers of sound as well. Thank you, Jarek, our sound designer, who's not on the panel, but I think is with us tonight. Wonderful, gorgeous. I'm a massive audiophile. It's I always have been, and love writing it for as much for radio or audio as the stage. I'm guessing I'm in good company because of the just instinctually brilliant job you just did there. Could you sort of tell us a bit about how a director and sound designer work together on something like this, and especially maybe audio's possibilities to bring the past to life in this way?
Thank you, Finn. It was very kind. And to answer your question, well, in my experience, I work really closely with a sound designer, engineer, and kind of spend quite a bit of time combing through like an initial assembly that the sound designer makes after we record kind of all the script with the actors. And kind of my experience radio is or like audio drama has been a glorious one, really. Just really enjoying time kind of with the actors. And this one was remote because I was out of the country, and so doing it over Zoom, though remote, it was still really fun. And then I had like several sessions with Jarek, just going through bit by bit the whole piece and kind of thinking about trying to place the audience within the piece, thinking about where is the audience in relation to the characters and the drama happening, and trying to kind of scale back or turn up different sounds in relation to that. And then thinking about music. There was a great reference in Mel's script about mento music, the kind of music that was around in the 1920s. And so that was a great opportunity to really think about how we could use music in this piece. And so I worked with DJ Wald, who kind of worked on slightly remixing kind of the pieces, sort of heightening it and sort of giving it a nod to today. while still keeping the 1920s sound. And then kind of Jarek put it within the piece, mixed it within the piece, and then we worked through the transition. So it was a lot of kind of time meticulously going through bit by bit. What are we hearing? Why are we hearing it? What story does it tell moment to moment? And then kind of thinking about the piece as a whole, as in the experience for the audience. What is that experience? And is it clear enough? Is it hourly interesting enough? All of that. And so me and Jarek spent quite a lot of time on Zoom, kind of combing through, and him sharing his interface, where I could see all the different colors of the different takes that we did with the actors and moving things around. I think what I mostly love about sound is, because I can be very detail orientated, it's quite satisfying to kind of work in that level of detail, though it might be annoying to some people. And maybe, I think Jarek did really well. His patience was great to kind of take all my detailed notes. And also one thing that I really love is just kind of being able to gather material. So in the recording process, and then being able to use it to tell the story. And different to theatre, which is a lot of my background, a lot of my time is spent there. You have a live event and kind of whatever you get on stage in that moment is what you get. But what's interesting about radio is that you can get lots of takes, and then you can actually mold the story and change bits and make it slightly different to work to the story in post, so in the sound editing process. And so you could take a laugh from kind of the beginning of the script that one of the actors did and put it somewhere else where it feels needed, that wasn't actually recorded on the recording day, and still make it work. And I just love that kind of editing process.
That's such a brilliant insight, and thank you. And it's such a pitch perfect job. I'm sure everyone would agree. I think one of the discoveries of lockdown has been that you can do all this online. We can still make drama, and here's how. And it's been a silver lining for sure. Kathryn, Kat, as you are, I gather, welcome, and I'm so glad you're here, because schools are a big part of my life and background, and where I developed a lot of my practice, and I wanted to sort of go through the sort of cycle of almost like the inspiration coming from Iqbal, and then through the kind of creative mind of Mel and the production expertise of Anastasia, to this sort of products that you then end up with, and how you go about using that. So could you tell us a bit more about how you take this material out into the world and design schemes of work for schools around it and so on?
Yeah, so just thanks, Mel. It's amazing, wonderful. It was really great to hear it. So definitely the aspect of bringing the story to life is really important. And when we teach, my background is in teaching history in schools, and you can talk about events and laws, and it can all be very dry, but when you're actually trying to find ways of bringing it to life, you're looking for those stories about how does it affect people. So of course our archive is full of information about this aspect that we can draw on. So when actually Iqbal approached me to work with James Gillespie's story beginning in 2019, his letter was so powerful. It was so easy to kind of think about how we can share this with young people, because it's so emotive. So we actually took that letter to Cardiff and worked with an archive and a school in Cardiff. And they're a very diverse city, as they were in the 20s, the 1920s, and the 2020s the same. So we do all of our work based on the documents and how they speak. We're just facilitating that and giving the voice back to people who've written it. So the work that we did on Jan Mohammed as well, it was just this incredible story that was uncovered through layers and layers of letters and documents that were charting his global life, and his attempt to kind of his agency was very clear, and we wanted to bring that out rather than just what the legislation was and what the law said, and in a very dry way, but how did it affect his life as an example of a real life story of a person. So with this project, it's actually in a totally different format for me, because we in the past have done creative work that starts with a document, and then we maybe the young people do some creative work. So now we're going to start with the play, and then my work now starts, because I'm going to be planning a resource that looks at the play first, and that's going to be a really exciting opportunity for me to kind of work in a slightly different way, think about how I can share this with young people. It's you know, it's on the curriculum, it's part of their education, it's not a sort of something that we have to find a way in with. You know, migration is part of the national curriculum, and if they study it at GCSE or at A-level, they need to look at these stories in depth. So it's a really exciting project and prospect to be embarking on. And you know, knowing the documents as I do, I can see the strong connection that Mel has made through this story. You know, it's absolutely rooted in words, phrases, everything is there, and she's created this beautiful picture of these lives, but it's rooted in their words, in the documents from the archives. So that will be a brilliant opportunity for young people to see how, you know, they might think something is fiction and fact, and working out how these stories can actually be represented in a different way. So it's really, really exciting. So I'm looking forward to it. So watch this space.
Thank you, and please keep us posted. We love to know how it is ends up being received in the, you know, in these contexts, because that's where the change happens, isn't it? That's what it's all about, really. Thank you. That was brilliant. Maybe we'll come back to that if any questions lead us in that direction. But with the point about truth and fiction, kind of leads me onto the first of the sort of audience questions, which, forgive me, for issues of time, I might elide two or three of them. But there's a few, I'm sensing a few people wanting to know, so what happened? What happened to them? Like, is this real? And Iqbal and perhaps Mel, between you, I wonder if you can say, is this literally the real story? And if not, you know, what was it? Mel, do you want to take that? I'm going to give the writer the responsibility.
Yeah, so there was a question about why James and Claudius meeting. So there's nothing in the records to suggest that they met. That was fictional. The reason why I wanted them to meet was because I wanted to hear Claudius talk to someone who knew exactly what he was saying. And the records that we have are letters that are written to the Colonial Office, so in a very different voice to the one that he might use to speak to May. And the voice that he might use to speak to May might be very different to the voice that he uses to speak to James. So there are these moments in the play where James just gets it. You know, of course you couldn't talk back to the Colonial Office because, you know, that's how we were raised, to be reverential, but May couldn't get it. And I wanted to hear that kind of pure voice from Claudius. In terms of the question of what happened to the family, I mean, maybe Iqbal can take that one.
Sure, thank you. Iqbal, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, we're still researching, but through some of the you know, ancestry type facilities, information is coming up about May. But that's something that I think we are going to have to wait for maybe a second draft, a second stage. But there is certainly a follow-on story, but I can't go into the detail at the moment. What we do know is that it appears that the character of May does actually go back to Jamaica. You know,
does she then sort of disappear from the records? We don't know anything else.
Yeah, that at the moment we don't. And I mean, we are talking to colleagues here if there's anything in the Jamaican archives that could unlock things. But that's, as I say, a much bigger project. Yeah. But certainly, just to bring this point about fact and fiction, one of the important things to understand is that historians have done work on this material, certainly, but where we've all struggled is that sense of what were the actual relationships, particularly between the husbands and the wives and those families and the people that they were with. And that's where fiction has such an important role to start feeding our imaginations and getting us to kind of develop our hunger to go and find out even more. So yeah, there is still much more, I think, in this story. I don't think this story is anywhere like finished yet. In the real story, I mean. Yeah.
Yes, how interesting that we're kind of making drama out of it in real time and sort of tracking your research almost. So we don't know yet. Well, join us for the next episode. Yeah, let's hope that there is one. There's an intriguing question, Iqbal. I'm going to stick with you if I may, just about whether there is like descendants, direct or indirect, around sort of the people in your records that you ever trace or that come into the archives. I know that they are used for family histories, but are they ever done by, say, Jamaicans in this way?
I mean, I think this is where it's really important, these histories of Black and brown people and people of colour. The assumption is that our records are not going to have much. But it's as these types of projects come to life, these, what I've referred to as marginal histories, and others have also referred to them as marginal histories, come centre stage. Hopefully it will really build an interest to say, let's find out more. And I mean, certainly when we've been researching on these sort of family sites, you know, there are people looking, but I don't know if they're making the connections yet. And I think some of this is about getting these names out there, getting these records out there. And I mean, the work that Kat's going to certainly be doing and has been doing is going to play such an important contribution, because through going to schools, particularly in those communities, and then seeing if then people can say, well, you know, I've heard that that's my great-great-grandfather or great-great-grandmother or whatever. I mean, those possibilities are so exciting and so tingling. So, you know, let's see, again, watch this space. But this is why this work is really important, about these Black, brown, people of colour histories being brought out so that people know that, you know, these are the stories that we need to follow up more on.
And I think on a moment to sort of acknowledge the film as well, which preceded the play, which encapsulated that so well and contained your beautiful closing lines, Iqbal. I thought about these are your stories. You know, they're not the archive stories. There are stories as nations of these isles, and it's true. There's quite a few questions that sort of I could ask Iqbal are about sort of historical details, but I'm mindful to sort of make the most of the rest of our panel, and I think you can answer some by text if you want to. So maybe you could have a look at any sort of simple responses you can give. I'll tease out something a bit later on history, but I wanted to come back to the kind of really the point where we meet, and the point where the arts and the archives and the artists and the institution kind of meet, because I think that's what's been so fruitful and exciting here. And it's about those relationships, isn't it? And so I wanted, Anastasia, if you could say, and Mel perhaps too, that what was so exquisitely drawn tonight was the truth of their love, I thought. And it's very easy to, through official records, get a sense of cynicism about these relationships. But actually, just if you think about it, the overwhelming majority of them must have been for real. You know, it was a lot of hardship people put them through. So, I mean, how do you, it's almost like I'm just asking you to explain the alchemical, I guess, but could we have your reflections on sort of, how do you tease out that emotion? Because it's not easy, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it started off with Mel's brilliant words and the script that she penned, which was, and I think part of the love story, well, I think the love story was part of what drew me to the piece, if not the main reason, because I think that's where there is joy. And you can see that there was, because there must have been joy in that time as human beings. Though we might live through adversity and difficult times, we definitely find the places of joy and the moments of joy in life. And so I think the script was so clear, and so it had great kind of direction in it in terms of the words, and so it was a joy to just bring it to life and to think kind of in detail what would be in those environments that Mel set up in the script.
Yeah, and
thank you, Mel.
I think from my perspective, I mean, what struck me as well was these were really young people. So I think May was in her late teens, actually. I think that's what the record showed. And Claudius was in his early 20s as well. So these were really young people with a lot of pressure and obstacles put in their way. And you spoke about cynicism, Finn. You know, in the records, we have words like sordid and a circus, and, I don't see why they wouldn't give their consent to send this man back. You know, there are all these negative thoughts about this relationship, and indeed, the suggestion that this man has just gone off and left his family to be a burden on the state. So I just wanted to capture their pure love, and I think you get that, it's amazing that May goes back and, you know, is in Jamaica several years later. For me, that just shows that this was a very complex, layered love story, and I wanted to explore that.
And thank you, you've done it so beautifully. I want to bring Kat in, because I think this is the way you get young people's attention, isn't it? It's really through the emotional heart of these stories, not dry records. So I wondered if you could say a bit more about that, and also perhaps what your experience has been of how far they engage with audio, because they're presumably a screen-based generation. I wonder if that's come up.
Yeah, I mean, just to say as well, a couple of things about my experience of James Gillespie's letter. His letter was full of love for his wife, because he was basically saying he's not going to go without her and his child. And it's so powerful. You know, he's experienced terrible racism. His shop has been destroyed, and actually his wife survives and his child survives. We don't actually know. It's not very clear in the record whether they go to Jamaica or not. It's sort of you know, this is the frustration of the record sometimes, that it runs out, you know. But it's just so powerful. And also, I just wanted to add about the importance of image as well, and photographs. So we did some research to try and find his photograph, because we knew he was a merchant seaman, and they have photograph cards, and we managed to find a photograph, and it was so wonderful to see his face. So we got these words, and you could feel his heart, but when you saw his face, you know, you just connected so much with the human being. And Iqbal had a similar experience with Claudius, didn't you, Iqbal, when he was like, I found him, sent me this email, you know, it's just beautiful. It's human to human, you know, to see their face is so powerful. And then thinking about the audio point, I think it's really interesting, and it's a huge development that we've done actually at the archive, not me, but other people have added audio to lots and lots of our documents. So we have huge document collections on our education pages that have been read by actors, and it's now, you know, you have an audio file as well as the document, and it adds so much. Of course it does. And for a young person who, you know, visually, you know, a piece of paper maybe doesn't light their fire, but, you know, sound, definitely, accent, voice is going to transmit a lot to them. And we want to give them a different, you know, opportunity to engage in a different way, you know, try from all different angles. They're human beings like we are. We want to have that kind of richness, that texture. So, you know, I absolutely think it's going to enhance their experience and make it come alive, because it's, you know, the sound is going to do that. I think that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. I'm so pleased to hear that they're so well received, and yeah, long may it continue. Iqbal, I'm going to come back to a historical question, because there's a good one here. There was obviously no welfare state in the 20s, but it seems there was funding for repatriation. So did the funding really split multiracial families, and was that a deliberate intention of the government? And subsequent to that, what was the case for families comprising only people of colour?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly speak about this thing of the policy of repatriation that started around the time of the riots in 1919. And the solution was that, you know, send the black men back, So this was where the policy kind of really started. And then it kind of went through different phases. And certainly this thing about, I mean, in our records, there is a concern about the sending back of white women because it might upset the social order. I mean, those are the words that were being used. So, I mean, there's this that's going on. It's not to say that one has to take every case literally individually, because each case has its own story. And depending on the time frame and who's involved, that also plays a part in this. In terms of families of colour, I mean, we've not as yet come across that in our records. It seems to be repeating the pattern of a black man with a white woman. And it's this issue of interracial marriage or relationship, which certainly is being flagged up in the press at the time as this, you know, it's referred in this particular set of documents to do with Claudius as a sordid history. And you can really see the deep racism that is being played out, particularly on this issue of mixed marriages. And so I think that's important to keep, you know, in mind. And I think what Mel's been able to do, is just to really give us a flavour of a general sort of flavor, because I think the specifics is what, as Kat starts to work with students, as historians, as they are doing more work, people can then draw out the specifics. But what Mel is giving us is the flavors that we need to just be aware of as we enter this territory to explore.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. There's a question here. I'm going to come back to Kat, actually. Someone asked, how have these creative projects impacted on your public engagement work? Like, because this isn't the first one that we've done for the archives. Can you see a difference in who's starting to access the archives or engage with them, or is it too soon to tell?
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that, but
well, maybe Bob can come in.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think tonight, I mean, we had over 200 people, and that, I mean, when I started on this journey at the National Archives, as Finn knows, we started, and it literally was a blank piece of paper. And I mean, the audiences and the interest has certainly grown in this work. And I mean, I think that's testament, and the fact that Kathryn and the team have embraced it as I always knew they would, but it's really embedding this work. So certainly, you know, this is now becoming part of our core offer, and that's very exciting.
Great, and I guess, is it possible to track sort of who comes to the archives, because you have to book, don't you? But I suppose it's like with theatre audiences, it's quite hard to track really specific characteristics.
I mean, it's something that is being done, but it's, you know, there is still a lot more work to be done. But we certainly know that people of Black and African Asian backgrounds, you know, there is still a big lot of work to do to get people to recognize that there are things here of interest and importance to them.
Great. Well, thank you. I hope we've helped with that. I've got one eye on the clock. I'm going to go on for another question or two, because the audience figures aren't dropping too quickly just yet. So I think some people are up for staying on. There's a good one here about how the play captured the power dynamic of the white rich father, and a request to hear, I guess, Mel or Anastasia say a bit more about that. The messages are echoingly strong now. I had a sort of similar thought actually on hearing it again tonight, that not just that, but that actually it's quite easy to sort of and it was very widespread, that obviously the white working class racism, but it's important not to forget that this actually did come from the top, and I think that there was, you know, well, you can see echoes of, say, what happens when behaviour at the top sort of, you know, filters down into society. So I wonder if you could reflect a bit on that and how you portray those sort of villainous figures, maybe Mel and then Anastasia.
So in this case, I mean, we knew from the documents that there was some opposition from the father, and there are some interesting bits and pieces which reflect that. So I just wanted to, you know, I didn't want to paint him as an absolute villain. I think, you know, hopefully you're able to see that there was a relationship between him and his daughter, and that, you know, we explore what happens to that relationship. But yeah, you know, I mean, obviously there was a lot of resistance, and it came from the father, and he, you know, we do know that May ended up in the workhouse, which means that her father didn't save her, and he had the potential to do so. So, you know, I wanted to make, you know, I wanted that to be part of the play.
Thank you. Anastasia.
I think it's quite interesting. Like, I love working on pieces that are inspired by, based on true story, because I think that that's what you bear in mind when you're kind of working on a piece like this. When we were recording, the actor Rob, who's lovely and so amazing, we kind of talked about trying to give a sense of the struggle and the turmoil that the dad must have been in, to have these bigoted thoughts and to think one way, but also kind of have the love for your daughter, and what that might sound like in his intonation and his voice as he's saying things that are really horrible, actually. And so we tried to kind of come up with a version that wasn't like, you know, he's a devil, but more communicating the struggle that we imagine must have been there, to kind of cut off your own daughter. But also the truth is that there was opposition. The truth is that he must have had these racist thoughts, and like you said, Finn, it's a product of the time, and from top down, like all the way through. So he kind of I'm sure was a product of his time. All the influences and the messages from top down were saying one thing about Black people, and therefore, you know, he would have believed those things. And so it's interesting to kind of bring to life and to kind of push that to the forefront, for people to kind of know the history. I think it's amazing the work that the National Archives are doing, and Kat, because when I was in school and I did history, I was really interested in history. I never heard about this, never had a project come into school that was talking about Black people in this time. So I think it's amazing that this is happening, and I think we do need to face the hard and horrible truth that there is past, but also the good things, like this love story. There must have been love stories like this, and the good and the bad needs to be shared for us to know our proper history.
Thank you. All of which, there's a question about, I mean, it's very hard to listen to parts of this play, actually, and I think that's particularly the case with audio, because it's so intimate when it's in your ears in headphones and you feel like you're there on the deck with them, or, you know, even when he's getting hit, it's hard to listen to. And there's a question about how you keep your kind of creative team safe in you know, doing a play like this, Anastasia, which I thought was sensitively asked. And it made me think of one as well, by extension, Kat, around the kinds of issues that this might bring up in a school, and how you mitigate against that. And you have a representative team, and are they sort of prepared to unpack this in quite what could be a charged way? Anastasia, maybe you could start with talking about the rehearsal room, and then Kat in school.
I think what was interesting is that we had quite a good extensive casting process, which Debo would kind of testify to, and we really wanted to find people who sort of had the heritage of the characters that were featured in the piece, because I think actually most of the people, like the actors, they already knew like the issues, the trauma, the you know, everything that's within the piece, and so it wasn't a traumatic thing to kind of explore the piece and to work on the piece. It was rather fueled, I think everyone was fueled by the fact that they felt important to bring to life this story, so that everyone can have more awareness of these issues. And so I think that's what kind of carried us through, and it was actually a really joyful experience despite the material that we were working on. And I think that's because we all loved the mix of the love story with the challenges that these characters have faced, and it felt like a human story that we could actually all relate to, and aspects of it that we kind of recognize in our family, parts of the story we all knew like already from stories that have been told to us by family. And so I think that's how we approached it, because I think the piece in itself is balanced enough that we weren't like only focusing on the trauma.
Thank you. You've reminded me as well to give a big shout out to our lead producer, Deborah Adebayo, who led on producing this, and not least the casting among everything else. And as usual, it all went without a hitch because he's so brilliant. Thank you, Debo. Can you on and how you sort of go about preparing for what these kinds of conversations might, unpack for people?
Yeah, we definitely. I mean, we have had experience of working with challenging language in documents, in other settings, in other lessons where we look at, like, for example, resistance and rebellion during the slave period, and we've really worked hard to think about how we want to not shy away from difficult topics, from not removing language that's in the documents, but preparing students beforehand, like we see quite often now with, a warning, or at least a raising that point. This is where we are going to be looking at these topics, which are going to be challenging, letting them know, giving them that context and that space, but also not shying away and not hiding it. And young people, they don't want to be wrapped up in cotton wool and protected. They want to understand, they want to know, they want to learn, and they don't want to be babied and overprotected, perhaps. But I think, it's also about appropriateness and age. We wouldn't necessarily work with really young pupils if we're talking about, something that we think maybe is not quite age appropriate. And just a flag that we recently launched a Black Victorians virtual workshop that was created by my colleague Jen Joffrey, and it was so well received. That was for primary age students, and it absolutely sold out. And we launched it for Black History Month, and we're still teaching it. Schools just want it. So teachers want to be supported to cover these issues in their classroom and know how to do it well. And all we have to do is to say we've got this resource, and it's absolutely picked up. So it is about making sure that it's dealt with in the proper way. But the demand is there, the need is there. That I think we want to respond to that.
Great, thank you. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to start to wrap up, but I'd like to close with Iqbal, if I may, as the kind of our man on the inside, as I always think of you, burrowing away and finding all this amazing stuff. There's a few questions we haven't been able to get to. I mean, do you want to say a bit more about if people have specific, if they want to research specific things at the archives, how they can go about that, and perhaps also what's next? There's a few questions about is there another collaboration with us, or a focus, which there isn't yet, but I hope there will be, but is there a focus of your research which might result in that?
So in terms of the archives, they're free to access. So that's the very good news. And there are very good research guides on the National Archives web pages. And we have a search engine called Discovery, which is also very user-friendly. So I think definitely, there is that ability now to search in a way that, in the analog days, it was much, much harder. We were being reminded recently at an event that, in the old days, it was just paper and cards. And now we've got the wonder of the internet. So certainly that's there. And in terms of what next, well, I mean, the big thing that I want to be working on is this 1925 Coloured Alien Seaman's Order, which was actually the net result of all of this concern about Black and brown and men from Middle East and Africa, the Caribbean. So the bringing out of this order in 1925. So to mark the 100th anniversary, we are now working on a plan to sort of really mark that 100 years of what the historian Laura Tabili has referred to as the first sort of example of state-sponsored racism in this country, with the publication of an order which basically said that, you can stop a coloured man and ask him, I mean, crudely speaking, has he got a right to be here? So just literally on the basis of the colour of your skin. So, I mean, I think this is a really big project that we're very keen to sort of develop, and it kind of then ties together all the work we've been doing pre-war, the First World War itself, and now post-war. So something to look forward to.
Thank you. Yes, onwards. And how exciting that all that is coming up. I hope we can be part of it. Luckily, you and Pooja are already in touch. So I hope you can work something up in my absence. I'm going to draw this evening to a close with huge thanks all round to everybody involved in this wonderful production, and also our friends and colleagues at the archives who've given us such a unique opportunity to extend our creative practice really as a company outside of just the arts and culture sector, and actually to have a sort of an applied application out there in the real world and making a difference to people, which is a particular passion of mine. So thank you, Iqbal, for entrusting us with these histories once again. I hope that this is the start of a long-running collaboration, which has already been quite long-running, hasn't it? And let's hope it continues, because I'm enjoying. I will be listening with interest, shall we say, on the audience side probably next time. But it's been a pleasure and an honour, so thank you. And thank you to our audience. We've been really well attended tonight, over 200 for the play itself and still over 100 for the Q&A. So thank you. We've had people mentioning that they're in Australia and other places. So the joys of the internet, as you say. It's always hard to close these things though, because we just have to log off. And that's really sad. And I don't know what the sort of Zoom etiquette is, whether it's been established to sort of do these in a kind of way where we might give each other a hug at the end of a press night. But a virtual hug all round. Thank you for coming, and watch this space for more. Thank you, panelists. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.